Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the opulent, yet often terrifying, golden sandals of a Roman emperor. Forget the glorious triumphs, the marble palaces, and the endless feasts you might imagine from movies. We're going to yank back the purple toga and reveal why being a Roman emperor sucked. Sometimes, imagine yourself sitting on the most powerful throne in the ancient world, with literally millions of lives and the fate of an entire empire resting on your shoulders. Sounds like absolute power. Right, becoming a Roman emperor was indeed the pinnacle of ancient ambition. But here's the cheeky reality check if you were a Roman emperor. You probably won't survive this. At least, not with all your family members, your sanity, or a guaranteed peaceful retirement. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first taste of the imperial burden wouldn't be the joy of power, but the immediate, suffocating sensation of omnipresent observation, divine burden, constant public scrutiny. No privacy. Forget quiet moments of contemplation or slipping away unnoticed. As a Roman emperor, your entire life was a performance, lived perpetually in the public eye, turning your existence into a gilded cage. Imagine waking up in your lavish imperial palace, surrounded by servants, advisors, and guards. Every aspect of your day, from your morning ablutions to your evening meal, was subject to constant public scrutiny. You were not just a man, you were a living god. Or at least, a divine representative on earth. Every gesture, every word, every decision was analyzed, interpreted, and often exaggerated by a vast network of courtiers, senators, and the Roman populace. Imagine trying to simply enjoy your breakfast, knowing that every bite is potentially being observed for signs of weakness, indulgence, or even a hidden message. It's like living in the world's most extravagant, yet completely inescapable reality TV show. But the ratings determine if you live or die. This meant there was virtually no privacy. Your personal chambers might have been grand, but they were never truly private. Servants were everywhere. Guards patrolled constantly. And even your closest family members or advisors might be secretly reporting on your behavior. Trying to find a moment of true solitude, to simply be yourself without the weight of the imperial persona, was a near impossibility. Imagine desperately wanting to just kick off your sandals and relax. But remembering that even a yawn could be seen as a sign of weakness to your ever-watchful retinue. It's enough to make you long for a simple, lockable door and a quiet corner that isn't under surveillance. Even your private life, your marriage, your children, your hobbies all were matters of public interest and political calculation. Your dining habits, your sartorial choices, even the way you walked, could become subjects of gossip or political commentary. The pressure to embody the ideal Roman leader stoic, just, powerful was relentless. Any deviation could be seen as a weakness or a sign of tyranny, quickly exploited by your enemies. This divine burden of perpetual public life transformed the emperor into a symbol, a living monument, but one whose humanity was often sacrificed for the sake of the empire. The very essence of being an emperor was to be seen, leaving little room for a private self. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this constant public scrutiny is the extensive use of public appearances, triumphal parades, and imperial portraiture statues, busts, coins throughout Roman history, all designed to project the emperor's image and power directly to the populace. Emphasizing their omnipresence, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to gain a moment of genuine privacy, would reportedly construct elaborate hidden passages or secret rooms within their palaces, accessible only through obscure mechanisms, purely to escape the constant, watchful eyes of their court. Imagine your secret hideout being a tiny, dusty room behind a sliding bookcase. just to get a moment to pick your nose without someone judging you. It certainly highlights the extreme lengths to which they went for a fleeting sense of normalcy. Historians still argue whether this constant public scrutiny primarily reinforced the emperor's absolute authority and helped stabilize the empire by projecting an image of unwavering power, or if it instead fostered profound paranoia and mental strain. Contributing to erratic behavior and instability, did it strengthen the empire, or just break the emperors regardless? Your reign as a Roman emperor would immediately be defined by a profound divine burden, living under constant public scrutiny with absolutely no privacy. So, your reign as a Roman emperor would immediately be defined by a profound divine burden, living under constant public scrutiny with absolutely no privacy. But even more terrifying than the loss of personal space was the chilling, omnipresent threat to your very existence, assassination threat, palace intrigue, praetorian danger. Forget peaceful reigns and natural retirements. The Roman imperial throne was less a seat of power and more a revolving door, often leading directly to a bloody end at the hands of those closest to you. Imagine going to bed each night, knowing that your life could end before morning. This was the terrifying reality of the assassination threat that hung over virtually every Roman emperor. The path to power was often paved with violence, and those who ascended to the purple rarely died peacefully in their beds. It's like being the CEO of a very large company, but all your board members are secretly trying to poison your coffee, and your security guards are on their payroll. The primary source of this danger often came from palace intrigue. Your own family members, ambitious senators, disgruntled former allies, or even trusted advisors could plot your demise. The stakes were incredibly high: power, wealth, and survival. Imagine having to constantly second-guess every smile, every whispered conversation, every seemingly innocuous gift, knowing that your closest confidants might be conspiring to replace you, perhaps even with a close relative. It's enough to make you long for a simple, honest job where your biggest worry is just a rude customer. Not a dagger in your back, but perhaps the most immediate and terrifying threat came from the very people sworn to protect you, the Praetorian danger. The Praetorian Guard, the elite personal bodyguard of the emperor, held immense power. They could make emperors, and just as easily, unmake them. Their loyalty was often bought, not earned, and they frequently played kingmakers, assassinating emperors they disliked or who couldn't pay them enough, and then installing their own chosen candidate. Imagine being surrounded by thousands of heavily armed men, whose loyalty could shift with a single coin. Knowing they've murdered your predecessors, it's like having a team of highly trained bodyguards, but they're also professional hitmen, and you're next on their list if someone offers them a better deal. This meant living in a constant state of hypervigilance and profound paranoia. Every servant, every guard, every advisor was a potential threat. Many emperors became reclusive, erratic, or outright tyrannical in response to this unbearable pressure, ironically often hastening their own downfall. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this assassination threat is the staggering number of Roman emperors who died by violent means rather than natural causes, with a significant portion being murdered by their own Praetorian Guard or close associates. Particularly during periods of imperial instability like the crisis of the 3rd century, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to test the loyalty of their food tasters or perhaps just their own tolerance, would reportedly consume tiny, sublethal doses of various poisons over time, hoping to build up an immunity. A macabre form of ancient, self-administered vaccine against assassination attempts. Imagine your daily vitamin routine involving a tiny bit of arsenic. It certainly highlights the pervasive fear of poisoning. Historians still argue whether the constant threat of assassination primarily led to a greater tyranny among emperors, as they ruthlessly eliminated perceived threats to secure their rule, or if it inadvertently forced emperors to be more responsive to the needs of the army and the populace. Knowing their survival depended on popular or military support, did it make them tyrants? Or just more pragmatic? Regardless, your time on the Roman throne was a relentless tightrope walk. shadowed by the perpetual assassination threat, fueled by insidious palace intrigue, and constantly imperiled by the ultimate Praetorian danger. So, your time on the Roman throne was a relentless tightrope walk, shadowed by the perpetual assassination threat, fueled by insidious palace intrigue, and constantly imperiled by the ultimate Praetorian danger. But even if you miraculously avoided the assassin's dagger, your days would be consumed by a different kind of monster, endless bureaucracy, vast empire. Administrative overload. Forget grand decrees and leisure time. Ruling Rome meant drowning in a sea of paperwork, petitions, and complex logistical challenges that could overwhelm even the most brilliant mind. Imagine waking up, not to the thrill of absolute power, but to a towering stack of scrolls and tablets. This was the reality of endless bureaucracy. The Roman Empire stretched from Britannia to Mesopotamia, encompassing dozens of provinces, hundreds of cities, and millions of diverse people. Managing such an immense and intricate entity meant an unimaginable volume of administrative tasks, reports, and decisions that landed squarely on your desk. It's like being the CEO of the world's largest, most geographically dispersed company, but your email inbox is actual papyrus scrolls that never stop arriving. The sheer scale of the vast empire was a logistical nightmare. Every province required governors, tax collectors, military garrisons, and judicial oversight, maintaining roads, aqueducts, and public buildings across this sprawling territory demanded constant attention and vast resources. Imagine having to approve expenditures for a road project in Gaul, appoint a new governor in Egypt, and review a tax dispute from Hispania, all before lunch. This was not just about making broad policy, it was about overseeing the granular details of an entire civilization. This led to profound administrative overload. As emperor, you were the ultimate arbiter, the final decision maker for everything. Petitions from distant towns, appeals from legal cases, reports from legions on the frontier, requests from senators, complaints from local officials all flowed up the chain of command. Eventually landing at your feet, you'd spend countless hours reading, annotating, dictating responses, and delegating, knowing that a single oversight could have far-reaching, disastrous consequences. Imagine trying to keep track of literally thousands of ongoing issues, each with its own complexities, while constantly being pressured by powerful factions. It's enough to make you wish for a simple spreadsheet program, or perhaps just a very long nap. The constant demands of the imperial administration often meant that emperors were less like grand strategists and more like glorified chief administrators, chained to their desks by the sheer volume of work. This wasn't the exciting part of being emperor, it was the mind-numbing, soul-crushing grind. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this administrative overload is the survival of countless Roman legal codes, imperial rescripts, and administrative directives, e.g., the Digest of Justinian or Pliny the Younger's letters to Trajan, showcasing the immense complexity and meticulous detail of imperial governance over vast territories. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of petitions and letters, would reportedly employ highly specialized scribes who could write at incredible speed using shorthand, creating a kind of ancient typing pool just to keep up with the imperial correspondence. Imagine your personal assistant being a human stenographer who could write faster than you could speak. Just to manage your daily to-do list, it certainly highlights the desperate need for efficiency in an age without computers. Historians still argue whether the endless bureaucracy of the Roman Empire primarily led to its eventual overextension and decline, by making it too unwieldy to govern effectively, or if it was, in fact, a testament to Roman ingenuity and organization, allowing such a vast entity to persist for centuries. Did it cause its fall? Or was it its secret to longevity regardless? Your life as a Roman emperor would be dominated by endless bureaucracy, grappling with the immense challenge of a vast empire and suffering from perpetual administrative overload. So, Your life as a Roman emperor would be dominated by endless bureaucracy, grappling with the immense challenge of a vast empire and suffering from perpetual administrative overload. But even more demanding than the never-ending paperwork were the physical and strategic realities of maintaining the empire's borders. Military demands campaigning, frontier defense, legions. Forget peaceful reigns spent in Rome. Many emperors were forced into arduous, perilous military roles, constantly managing the immense apparatus of war. Where their lives and the empire's fate hung precariously on every battle, imagine being the commander-in-chief of arguably the most powerful military machine the ancient world had ever seen. This wasn't a ceremonial title, it carried immense and terrifying military demands. The Roman Empire was built on conquest and maintained by force, meaning you, as emperor, were expected to be a military leader, whether you had a natural aptitude for it or not. It's like becoming a country's leader, only to find out your main job is actually a frontline general, and your office is literally the battlefield. Many emperors found themselves constantly campaigning. This meant grueling marches. Living in rough military camps, remember those squalid conditions from our medieval warrior script, but slightly more organized, and personally leading legions into battle against formidable foes on distant frontiers. Imagine riding at the head of your army into the cold, damp forests of Germania, or across the scorching deserts of Parthia, far from the comforts of Rome, risking your life in every skirmish. This was not a quick, decisive war. It was often a protracted, attritional struggle against various barbarian tribes or rival empires. The challenge of frontier defense was immense and never-ending. The vast borders of the empire stretched for thousands of miles, requiring constant vigilance and massive military deployment. You'd be responsible for managing dozens of legions, each with thousands of highly trained, often demanding soldiers scattered across diverse and hostile environments. Imagine receiving reports of barbarian incursions on the Rhine, a revolt in Judea, and a Persian offensive in the east, all simultaneously. Knowing that each crisis demanded your immediate attention and strategic genius. This wasn't just about fighting battles, it was about managing a colossal, global defense system, and the loyalty of those legions was paramount, yet often fickle. Your power ultimately rested on their spears, but they could also be the instruments of your downfall. Remember the Praetorian danger. You had to keep them well paid, well fed, and victorious, or risk mutiny and civil war. Imagine trying to balance the needs of a distant legion with the demands of the Senate back in Rome, knowing that one wrong move could cost you your throne, or your life. This constant engagement with the military, whether on campaign or through strategic oversight, placed immense pressure on the emperor, often forcing them away from the capital and into physically demanding and psychologically taxing environments. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these military demands is the numerous Roman emperors who spent significant portions of their reigns on campaign at the frontiers, such as Trajan expanding the empire into Dacia and Parthia, or Marcus Aurelius fighting the Marcomannic Wars on the Danube, demonstrating the active military role expected of the imperator. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, particularly those less militarily inclined, would reportedly carry a small, portable military map of the entire empire with them at all times, sometimes even using it during dinner parties, constantly scrutinizing border defenses even during social engagements. Imagine trying to enjoy a lavish banquet, but your host keeps pulling out a giant map and muttering about barbarian movements. It certainly highlights their obsessive dedication to imperial security. Historians still argue whether the constant military demands on Roman emperors primarily contributed to the empire's vast expansion and long-term stability by ensuring strong leadership on the frontiers, or if they ultimately overstretched imperial resources and led to frequent instability through army-backed coups and assassinations. Did it strengthen Rome, or just exhaust it regardless? Your time as a Roman emperor was inextricably linked to immense military demands, compelling you to constant campaigning, relentless frontier defense, and the perpetual management of demanding legions. So, Your time as a Roman emperor was inextricably linked to immense military demands, compelling you to constant campaigning, relentless frontier defense, and the perpetual management of demanding legions. But even beyond the battlefield and the bureaucracy, a more fundamental, often insurmountable, challenge loomed: financial strain, imperial costs, empty coffers, bribery. Forget endless gold and lavish spending. The Roman emperor was often less a magnate of boundless wealth and more a harassed accountant, desperately trying to balance an unsustainable budget, perpetually battling insolvency. Imagine that golden throne in your palace. It didn't pay for itself. This was the crushing reality of financial strain. Running an empire the size of Rome, with its vast military, its intricate administration, its public works, and its demanding populace, required truly astronomical sums of money. As emperor, the ultimate responsibility for finding, managing, and often fabricating these funds fell squarely on your shoulders. It's like being in charge of the world's largest, most expensive household, but your family keeps growing, and your income streams are constantly under threat. The imperial costs were staggering. Maintaining those dozens of legions, remember them, paying their wages, equipping them, and funding their campaigns was the single largest drain on the imperial treasury. Then there were the massive expenditures for public works: roads, aqueducts, temples, colosseums, all designed to maintain the empire's infrastructure and project its glory. Add to that the cost of the imperial court itself, its legions of servants, advisors, and personal guards. And you had a budget that would make modern nations blush. Imagine trying to justify a multi-million-dollar military budget while simultaneously trying to fund an elaborate new public bath complex and keep the Praetorian Guard happy with a hefty bonus. This often led to empty coffers, despite the vast wealth flowing into Rome from conquered provinces and taxes. The expenditures frequently outstripped the income. Wars were ruinously expensive. Famines or plagues could devastate tax-paying populations, and imperial vanity projects could quickly drain reserves. You might inherit an empire on the brink of bankruptcy and spend your entire reign desperately trying to fill a bottomless pit. Imagine sweating over your financial ledgers, seeing red numbers everywhere, and realizing that the vastness of your empire is its greatest financial liability. It's enough to make you long for the simpler days of just being a rich senator instead of a perpetually broke emperor. And then there was the ubiquitous practice of bribery. To secure the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard, to pacify mutinous legions, or to win over powerful senators, emperors often had to resort to immense cash payouts or lavish gifts. This wasn't just a discretionary expense, it was a constant, necessary drain on resources to maintain power, particularly during times of instability. Imagine having to literally buy the loyalty of your own personal guard, knowing that if you can't pay, they might just murder you and install someone who can. This relentless financial strain dictated many imperial decisions, forcing emperors to make unpopular choices like devaluing coinage leading to inflation, raising taxes, or even confiscating wealth, all of which could destabilize their rule and lead to further unrest. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this financial strain is the frequent debasement of Roman coinage throughout imperial history, particularly during the 3rd century crisis, where emperors dramatically reduced the silver content of coins to stretch limited resources, leading to widespread inflation and economic instability. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, desperate for funds, would reportedly resort to highly eccentric and often morally questionable methods of raising money, such as selling off imperial titles, auctioning off the property of executed rivals, or even levying taxes on public latrines as Vespasian famously did. Imagine getting a tax bill for using the public toilet. It certainly highlights the lengths to which they went to fill the imperial coffers. Historians still argue whether the constant financial strain on Roman emperors primarily spurred administrative and economic innovations, as they sought more efficient ways to manage imperial wealth, or if it was an inherent flaw in the Roman system, inevitably leading to economic collapse and political instability. Did it make them creative? Or just bankrupt regardless? Your reign as Roman emperor would be a perpetual battle against financial strain, burdened by immense imperial costs, perpetually facing empty coffers, and constantly resorting to necessary bribery just to cling to power. So, your reign as Roman emperor would be a perpetual battle against financial strain, burdened by immense imperial costs, perpetually facing empty coffers, and constantly resorting to necessary bribery just to cling to power. But even if you somehow managed to juggle the treasury and keep the Praetorians at bay, you faced an equally daunting, often impossible task: public expectations bred in circuses. Moral example: forget private whims and personal desires as emperor. You were perpetually on display, forced to placate a vast, demanding populace with endless entertainment and project an impossibly perfect image. Or face their wrath. Imagine stepping out onto the balcony of your palace, or into the arena. Thousands, even millions, of eyes would be on you. This was the crushing weight of public expectations. The Roman populace, particularly in the sprawling capital, demanded constant gratification and reassurance from their leader. You weren't just a ruler, you were also the ultimate entertainer, provider, and moral compass for the entire empire. It's like being a rock star, a social worker, and the head of a massive charity, all rolled into one. But if you stop performing, they might just burn your house down. The most famous of these demands was bread in circuses, panem et circenses. You were expected to ensure a steady supply of cheap or free grain to feed the masses, preventing riots and discontent caused by hunger. Simultaneously, you had to provide spectacular public games, gladiatorial contests, chariot races, wild beast hunts to keep the populace entertained and distracted from their daily hardships. Imagine the immense logistical challenge of ensuring enough grain arrived in Rome to feed 1 million people every day, while also organizing gladiatorial fights that cost a fortune and demanded fresh supplies of exotic animals and trained fighters. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life as a farmer, where your biggest worry is just a bad harvest, beyond basic provisions. You were also expected to set a moral example. The emperor was, in theory, the embodiment of Roman virtues: piety, gravitas, justice, and courage. Your personal behavior, your marriage, your modesty or lack thereof, and your adherence to traditional Roman values were constantly scrutinized. Any perceived extravagance, decadence, or moral failing could be seized upon by critics, fueling rumors and undermining your legitimacy. Imagine trying to live a perfectly virtuous life, knowing that every private mistake could become public fodder, and every indulgence could be spun as a sign of your unworthiness. It's like living under a permanent, very judgmental microscope. But instead of social media, the consequences are riots and assassination plots. The pressure to constantly appear benevolent, powerful, and in control, while simultaneously balancing the empire's vast needs with the whims of the crowd, was immense. Failure to meet these public expectations could quickly lead to unrest, riots, and ultimately, your downfall. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these public expectations is the well-documented practice of emperors funding massive grain dole programs, anonaceae, and public games for the populace of Rome. As evidenced by historical texts and archaeological remains of amphitheaters and circuses built throughout the empire, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to appear popular and benevolent, would reportedly even participate themselves in the public games, sometimes as charioteers or gladiators, often secretly fixing the outcomes to ensure their victory and thus boost their public image. Imagine your country's leader competing in the Olympics and winning every event. Just to get good poll numbers, it certainly highlights the lengths to which they went to manage public perception. Historians still argue whether meeting these public expectations primarily served as a crucial tool for imperial stability, placating the masses and maintaining social order, or if it was an unsustainable drain on imperial resources that ultimately contributed to the empire's long-term decline? Did it stabilize Rome, or just bankrupt it regardless? Your life as a Roman emperor was a relentless performance, constantly battling public expectations, providing endless bread and circuses, and struggling to embody an impossible moral example. So, your life as a Roman emperor was a relentless performance, constantly battling public expectations, providing endless bread and circuses, and struggling to embody an impossible moral example. But even if you navigated these treacherous social waters, a more profound and existential dread would haunt your later years. Succession crises, dynastic struggle, civil war threat. Forget secure transitions of power and peaceful handovers. The question of who would rule after you is a constant, often bloody, source of instability that could tear the empire apart, making your own reign a temporary calm before a storm. Imagine reaching the height of your power, having survived all the assassination plots and military campaigns. Now, a new, equally terrifying problem emerges: who comes next? This was the omnipresent burden of succession crises. The Roman Empire lacked a clear, formalized system for imperial succession. It wasn't purely hereditary, nor was it a simple election. This ambiguity meant that every emperor's death, or even just their advanced age, opened the door to intense and often violent competition for the throne. It's like being the head of a massive corporation, but there's no clear line of succession, and all your potential heirs are heavily armed and willing to murder each other for the corner office. This inherent uncertainty frequently led to brutal dynastic struggle. Your own family members' sons, adopted heirs, brothers, even wives could become your greatest rivals, or the pawns of ambitious factions. Imagine having to choose an heir from among your own children, knowing that your choice might alienate others, spark jealousy, and potentially lead to their immediate plotting against you, or against each other after your death. The relationships within the imperial family were often poisoned by ambition and paranoia. It's enough to make you wish for a simple family tree that doesn't include 27 different branches all pointing a dagger at each other. The ultimate nightmare of a succession crisis was the civil war threat. When an emperor died without a universally accepted heir, or when multiple powerful factions backed different candidates, the empire could descend into widespread civil conflict. Legions would declare their own emperors, provinces would take sides, and the entire Roman world would be plunged into chaos, costing countless lives and untold wealth. Imagine realizing that your death, no matter how peaceful, would almost certainly trigger a bloody, empire-wide conflict, undoing much of your life's work. This lack of a clear, stable succession mechanism was a fundamental weakness of the Roman imperial system, ensuring that periods of immense instability and violence were almost inevitable, perpetually undermining the long-term health of the empire. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these succession crises is the crisis of the 3rd century 235 and 284 AD, a period marked by constant civil wars, numerous short-lived emperors, many of whom were murdered by their own troops, and rampant instability directly stemming from a breakdown in the imperial succession process. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to legitimize their chosen successors, would reportedly adopt them even if they were adults and not biologically related, then parade them around Rome and associate them with divine symbols, trying to force public acceptance through symbolic gestures. Imagine adopting a 40-year-old man as your son just to get him into office. It certainly highlights the awkward and often desperate measures taken to manage the succession. Historians still argue whether the perennial succession crises primarily prevented the Roman Empire from stagnating. By continually bringing new leaders and perspectives to power, or if they were an inherent, crippling flaw that ultimately contributed to its fragmentation and decline by fostering chronic instability. Did it refresh the empire, or just constantly destabilize it? Regardless, your time on the Roman throne was haunted by the looming specter of succession crises, perpetually shadowed by dynastic struggle, and constantly threatened by the terrifying reality of civil war threat. So, Your time on the Roman throne was haunted by the looming specter of succession crises, perpetually shadowed by dynastic struggle and constantly threatened by the terrifying reality of civil war threat. But even if you navigated the political minefield and secured your succession, the immense physical and mental demands of the job would wage a relentless war on your own. Being health risked over work. Stress? Primitive medicine? Forget a cushy life of leisure. The imperial purple often came with a severe physical and psychological cost. Shortening reigns and ensuring that illness, rather than assassins, could be your ultimate undoing. Imagine the relentless pace of your imperial life. Every day was a marathon of meetings, decisions, ceremonies, and public appearances. This immense workload, combined with the constant pressure, led to severe health risks. You might be surrounded by luxury, but your body was under constant assault from the demands of the job. It's like having the world's most prestigious job. But your job description includes burnout guaranteed and premature demise likely. The sheer volume of responsibilities led to profound overwork. From managing vast armies and intricate bureaucracies, remember those to presiding over legal cases and public games. An emperor's day was packed from dawn till dusk, often extending late into the night. There was little time for rest, relaxation, or even regular meals. Imagine trying to make critical decisions about frontier defense and tax policy after weeks of sleepless nights and constant travel. Your mind foggy with exhaustion. It's enough to make you wish for a simple 9-to-5 job where your biggest concern is just hitting your quota. Compounding the physical strain was unimaginable stress. The constant fear of assassination, remember that. 2. The political machinations of the Senate. The demands of the Praetorian Guard, the threat of barbarian invasions, and the sheer weight of responsibility for millions of lives all conspired to create an environment of extreme psychological pressure. Imagine carrying the fate of an entire empire on your shoulders, knowing that one wrong move could lead to civil war, famine, or your own violent death. Every single day, this relentless mental burden would take a severe toll on your nervous system and overall well-being. And when illness inevitably struck, you'd be at the mercy of primitive medicine. Roman physicians, while advanced for their time, lacked modern understanding of hygiene, infection, or diagnostics. Treatments could be ineffective, painful, or even harmful. A simple fever could become life-threatening. A minor ailment could escalate due to misdiagnosis or contaminated procedures. Imagine suffering from a chronic digestive issue or crippling headaches due to stress. And your doctor's offering you strange herbal concoctions or even bloodletting as a cure. It's like going to a doctor who thinks bad humors are the cause of your problems. And your best hope is that they just don't make it worse. This combination of relentless demands, extreme stress, and rudimentary medical care meant that many Roman emperors suffered from chronic illnesses, severe mental health issues, and often died prematurely. Their reigns cut short by the inherent pressures of the purple. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these health risks is the documented chronic illnesses and early deaths of numerous Roman emperors, such as Augustus's lifelong delicate health or Tiberius's eventual decline into reclusiveness and paranoia, often attributed by historians to the immense stresses of imperial rule and lack of effective medical treatment. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, desperate to improve their health or ward off illness, would reportedly consult a wide array of alternative practitioners. From Greek physicians using complex theories of humors to Egyptian healers employing strange rituals, trying every possible remedy to cope with their ailments. Imagine your imperial healthcare plan involving a visit to a mystic who tells you to rub crocodile dung on your temples. It certainly highlights the limitations of their medical science. Historians still argue whether the high health risks faced by Roman emperors primarily led to shorter and less effective reigns, making long-term planning difficult, or if the very act of enduring such suffering forged incredibly resilient and often ruthless leaders who were hardened by their physical and mental battles. Did it debilitate them, or just make them tougher? Regardless, Your time as Roman emperor was a relentless assault on your physical and mental well-being, marked by constant health risks, profound overwork, debilitating stress, and the harsh limitations of primitive medicine. So, your time as Roman emperor was a relentless assault on your physical and mental well-being, marked by constant health risks, profound overwork, debilitating stress, and the harsh limitations of primitive medicine. But even if you manage to keep your body and mind intact, the external pressures of a vast and often hostile world were always pressing in: foreign relations, barbarian incursions, diplomacy, treaties. Forget a peaceful isolation. The Roman Empire was in constant contact, and often conflict, with numerous external powers, making foreign policy a relentless and often terrifying responsibility. Imagine receiving dispatches from the far-flung corners of your empire. These wouldn't be pleasant reports of flourishing trade and friendly neighbors. Instead, they would be filled with news of foreign relations and the never-ending challenges of managing the empire's vast frontiers. As emperor, you were Rome's chief diplomat, strategist, and often its primary military defender against a host of external threats. It's like being the head of a massive, heavily fortified mansion, but all your neighbors are constantly trying to break down your walls or steal your expensive lawn ornaments. The most persistent headache came from barbarian incursions. Along the Rhine, the Danube, and in the east, various Germanic tribes, Sarmatians, Picts, and eventually Huns, constantly tested Rome's borders. These weren't always full-scale invasions, but relentless raids, skirmishes, and opportunistic attacks that demanded constant vigilance and military response. Remember those legions. Imagine receiving news that a band of Goths has crossed the Danube, burning villages and taking captives, knowing that you must immediately dispatch legions to respond, diverting precious resources from other parts of the empire. It's enough to make you wish for a quiet, isolated island where the biggest threat is just a particularly aggressive seagull. Beyond the immediate military threats, you were constantly engaged in complex diplomacy. You had to negotiate with client kings, forge alliances with powerful tribes, or cleverly play rival barbarian groups against each other to maintain a fragile peace. This required a keen understanding of foreign cultures, intricate negotiation skills, and a willingness to offer concessions or threats to achieve your aims. Imagine spending weeks in tense negotiations with a shaggy-haired chieftain who barely speaks Latin, trying to secure a fragile peace treaty that you know might be broken the moment your back is turned. And then there were the treaties. These formal agreements were crucial for establishing peace, defining borders, or securing military assistance. But they were often difficult to enforce, easily broken, and sometimes came with humiliating terms or significant financial obligations, more stress on those empty coffers. Remember, imagine signing a treaty that guarantees peace for a decade, only to receive news 6 months later that the peaceful barbarians have just launched another raid, making your carefully crafted agreement utterly worthless. This complex and often hostile international landscape meant that a Roman emperor was rarely at peace. The external pressures were constant, demanding a perpetual state of readiness, immense strategic foresight, and an often frustrating dance with numerous powerful and unpredictable foreign entities. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these foreign relations is the construction and constant reinforcement of vast frontier defense systems like Hadrian's Wall in Britannia and the Limes in Germania, demonstrating Rome's continuous effort to manage and defend against external pressures. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that Roman emperors would sometimes engage in elaborate gift diplomacy, sending incredibly expensive and exotic presents, like rare animals from Africa or ornate gold artifacts, to barbarian chieftains in an attempt to buy their loyalty or deter their aggression, essentially using luxury goods as a form of ancient foreign aid or protection money. Imagine your foreign policy relying on whether a German warlord likes your new pet lion. It certainly highlights the unusual tactics they sometimes employed. Historians still argue whether the constant engagement in foreign relations primarily led to the strategic overstretch of the Roman Empire. diverting too many resources to external defense, or if it was a testament to Roman diplomatic skill, allowing them to manage complex geopolitical challenges for centuries despite immense pressure. Did it weaken Rome, or was it a sign of its strength? Regardless, your imperial life was a never-ending saga of foreign relations, battling persistent barbarian incursions, navigating complex diplomacy, and trying to enforce fragile treaties. So, your imperial life was a never-ending saga of foreign relations, battling persistent barbarian incursions, navigating complex diplomacy, and trying to enforce fragile treaties. But even when you weren't on campaign or at the negotiating table, the sheer scale of the empire meant your personal life was often a grueling exercise in perpetual motion travel and logistics constant movement. Arduous journeys. Forget settled routines and comfortable homes. Many emperors were forced into endless tours of inspection, military expeditions, and administrative visits, making their lives a blur of unceasing, often dangerous, travel across vast distances. Imagine receiving a dispatch informing you that a new crisis has erupted in a distant province, or that a vital new road needs your personal inspection. You wouldn't simply send a subordinate as emperor. Your presence often commanded respect, quelled rebellions, and unified diverse populations, meaning you were often compelled to embark on travel and logistics that would exhaust a modern head of state. It's like having a job where your office is constantly moving, and your commute involves hundreds of miles on a very bumpy, very slow, and potentially very unsafe road. This meant a life of constant movement. Emperors would travel with massive retinue staff. Guards remember the praetorians, servants, advisors, and their families, turning every journey into a logistical nightmare. Imperial progress would disrupt local life, demanding resources and accommodations from every town and village along the route. Imagine the sheer effort required to move hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people and their supplies across rudimentary roads, over mountains, and through forests, all while maintaining imperial dignity and security. It's enough to make you long for a simple stationary desk job, where your biggest travel challenge is just finding a good parking spot. The journeys themselves were incredibly arduous. Roman roads, while impressive, were still rough by modern standards. Carriages were uncomfortable, prone to breaking down, and incredibly slow. Sea travel was at the mercy of the winds and prone to violent storms, shipwreck, and piracy. Imagine spending weeks or months bouncing along in a jolting carriage, covered in dust or mud, enduring the elements, your body aching from the constant vibration. Or imagine being tossed about on a stormy sea voyage, constantly seasick, praying you don't end up as fish food. Beyond the physical discomfort, there were logistical nightmares, securing fresh water, adequate food, remember that awful food, and safe lodging for your enormous retinue in distant or sparsely populated regions was a continuous headache. Messengers would constantly bring urgent dispatches, demanding decisions on the fly, far from the resources of the imperial capital. This unrelenting demand for travel and logistics meant that for many emperors, Rome was less a permanent home and more a distant administrative hub. Their lives were defined by the endless road, a testament to the sheer physical and mental endurance required to govern such a sprawling empire. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these travel demands is the extensive network of Roman roads, e.g., the Via Appia, Via Augusta, and the detailed itineraries like the Itinerarium Antonini Augusti that documented routes and stopping points, confirming the necessity of efficient travel for imperial administration and military movements. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, despite their immense power, would reportedly become incredibly impatient with the slow pace of imperial travel and would resort to having themselves carried in litters by relays of strong slaves or soldiers, constantly urging them to move faster, sometimes forcing them to run for hours on end, turning their personal transportation into a grueling, human-powered endurance race. Imagine being the human equivalent of an imperial Uber driver, but your passenger is the most powerful man in the world, and he's constantly telling you to step on it. It certainly highlights the imperial impatience with slow ancient travel. Historians still argue whether the constant travel and logistical demands on Roman emperors primarily contributed to more effective governance, by allowing emperors to personally oversee distant provinces, or if it instead debilitated them physically and mentally, and often left the capital vulnerable to palace coups. Did it make them better rulers, or just more exhausted targets? Regardless, your imperial life would involve relentless travel and logistics, defined by constant movement, grueling and arduous journeys, all essential but deeply burdensome aspects of your rule. So, your imperial life would involve relentless travel and logistics, defined by constant movement, grueling and arduous journeys, all essential but deeply burdensome aspects of your rule. But even when you were settled in Rome, the weight of ultimate authority brought another crushing responsibility: legal judgments, Supreme Court, endless petitions, justice. Forget simply delegating. As emperor, you were the final arbiter of Roman law, a living Supreme Court, inundated with cases and pleas from across the empire. Making your role as a judge a relentless and often agonizing duty, imagine sitting on your judgment seat, a seemingly endless line of petitioners, litigants, and legal experts awaiting your pronouncement. This was the demanding reality of legal judgments. The Roman legal system was complex and extensive, but the emperor served as its ultimate authority, the final court of appeal, and often, the source of new legal precedents. It's like being the Chief Justice, the Attorney General, and the entire legal aid department, all rolled into one. And everyone wants your personal opinion on their neighbor's chicken dispute. As the de facto Supreme Court, countless cases, appeals, and petitions from every corner of the empire would ultimately land on your desk. From disputes over property and inheritance to accusations of treason and murder. The sheer volume of legal matters requiring imperial attention was immense. Imagine having to sift through dense legal arguments written on scrolls, listening to verbose advocates, and then rendering a decision that could impact lives, fortunes, and the very stability of a province, all while battling legal jargon and the occasional outright lie. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life as a legal clerk. Just filing papers, not making life or death decisions. This led to endless petitions. Individuals, communities, and provincial governors would send appeals directly to the emperor, seeking his intervention, clemency, or clarification of law. You were expected to read them, or at least have them summarized, and then issue rescripts imperial responses that often carried the force of law. Imagine your mornings consisting of reviewing a stack of personal pleas, some genuinely desperate, others trivial, knowing that you could only attend to a fraction of them, and that every unaddressed petition represented a frustrated citizen. It's like having the world's largest suggestion box. But all the suggestions are actually demands for your personal intervention. And then there was the immense burden of delivering justice. Your decisions set precedents and could be seen as reflections of imperial virtue or tyranny. There was immense pressure to be perceived as fair, wise, and incorruptible, even when faced with contradictory evidence, powerful lobbying, and the political implications of every verdict. Imagine having to weigh evidence, determine guilt, and decide punishments, knowing that your personal integrity and the legitimacy of the entire Roman legal system rested on your pronouncements. This relentless demand for legal judgment was a significant drain on an emperor's time and mental energy, making the imperial throne not just a seat of power, but a never-ending courtroom where the scales of justice often felt incredibly heavy. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these legal demands is the existence of the Codex Justinianus, Justinian's Code, and the Digesta, massive compilations of Roman law and imperial judgments, which highlight the vast body of legal work emperors were involved in. From issuing new laws to resolving countless specific cases, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to streamline the overwhelming number of legal petitions, would reportedly employ specialized responders who were trained to quickly read, summarize, and draft formulaic replies to common requests, creating a kind of imperial FAQ bot long before the internet. Imagine your complex legal problem being answered by a pre-written, generic imperial statement. It certainly highlights the challenges of scale. Historians still argue whether the emperor's role as the supreme legal authority primarily ensured a consistent and centralized application of Roman law, fostering stability across the empire, or if it concentrated too much power in one individual, leading to arbitrary judgments and abuses that undermine the rule of law. Did it bring order, or just create unchecked power regardless? Your reign as a Roman emperor meant being perpetually immersed in legal judgments, acting as the ultimate supreme court, drowning in endless petitions, and carrying the immense burden of delivering justice for millions. So, your reign as a Roman emperor meant being perpetually immersed in legal judgments, acting as the ultimate supreme court, drowning in endless petitions, and carrying the immense burden of delivering justice for millions. But beyond the earthly laws and administrative duties, your role was also deeply intertwined with the spiritual well-being of the empire, bringing a unique set of pressures, religious obligations, chief priest, divine cults, omens. Forget personal beliefs and private worship. As emperor, you were the supreme religious authority, burdened by ancient rituals, complex traditions, and the constant need to ensure divine favor, making your spiritual role a demanding, often superstitious, duty. Imagine performing a sacred ritual, clad in flowing robes, surrounded by priests and incense. This was a daily reality due to your religious obligations. As Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest, you held the highest religious office in Rome, responsible for maintaining the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, which was believed to ensure Rome's prosperity and survival. Your actions, your piety, and your adherence to ancient customs were seen as vital for the well-being of the entire empire. It's like being the head of state, but also the Pope. And if you mess up a prayer, the entire country might experience a famine. This meant actively participating in numerous divine cults, from the traditional Roman pantheon Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, etc., to the imperial cult where deceased emperors and eventually living ones were worshipped as gods. You were expected to lead sacrifices, processions, and prayers. Imagine presiding over the ritual slaughter of an ox, meticulously observing every detail, knowing that the slightest error could be interpreted as an affront to the gods and a bad omen for the empire. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life where your biggest spiritual task is just remembering to say bless you when someone sneezes. And speaking of omens, the constant interpretation of omens added another layer of superstitious pressure. Roman society was deeply superstitious, and emperors were expected to consult augurs, examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, interpret lightning strikes, and heed dreams. Every unusual event, from a flock of birds flying in a strange pattern to a sudden earthquake, could be seen as a divine message requiring your careful consideration and action. Imagine making a crucial military decision, not based on strategy, but on whether the chickens ate their grain quickly enough that morning. This reliance on divination could be incredibly stressful, as any misfortune could be blamed on your failure to correctly interpret or appease the gods. This pervasive religious role meant that the emperor was not just a political and military leader, but also the guardian of Rome's spiritual health, constantly performing rituals and seeking divine approval, often under immense pressure and fear of supernatural retribution. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these religious obligations is the imperial cult, which became widespread throughout the Roman Empire, where altars and temples were dedicated to the worship of the emperor and his family, serving as a powerful tool for political loyalty and religious unity. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, particularly those known for their piety, would reportedly spend hours meticulously studying ancient Etruscan books of divination, like the Disciplina Etrusca, which contained incredibly detailed and arcane rules for interpreting lightning and liver omens. In a desperate attempt to gain clearer insights into divine will, imagine spending your evenings poring over a very old, very complex book about how to read sheep livers, all to figure out if you should invade Gaul. It certainly highlights the unique blend of power and superstition that defined their religious duties. Historians still argue whether the emperor's extensive religious obligations primarily served as a vital unifying force for the diverse empire, integrating various cultures under a common spiritual head, or if it simply added an immense, superstitious burden that often led to irrational decision-making and heightened public anxieties. Did it unify, or just add stress regardless? Your life as a Roman emperor was inextricably bound by profound religious obligations. Acting as chief priest, overseeing numerous divine cults, and constantly interpreting perplexing omens. So, your life as a Roman emperor was inextricably bound by profound religious obligations. Acting as chief priest, overseeing numerous divine cults, and constantly interpreting perplexing omens. But amidst all the public duties and political machinations, the very nature of your supreme power could lead to a chilling, pervasive sense of detachment. Personal isolation, trust issues, flattery, true friends. Forget intimate connections and genuine camaraderie. The imperial throne was a lonely pinnacle, where suspicion was rampant, sincerity was rare, and the concept of a true confidant often became a dangerous illusion. Imagine sitting in your palace, surrounded by hundreds of people, yet feeling utterly alone. This was the profound reality of personal isolation. The higher you ascended in Roman society, especially to the pinnacle of imperial power, the fewer true peers or genuine friends you could truly trust. Everyone around you had an agenda, and your status as emperor made you both a target and a means to an end. It's like being the most popular kid in school, but everyone only wants to hang out with you because you have the best lunch money, and half of them are planning to steal it. The constant threat of assassination and betrayal, remember that Praetorian danger and palace intrigue bred severe trust issues. You couldn't afford to be naive. Every advisor, every courtier, every family member had the potential to be a conspirator. Imagine having to constantly analyze the motives behind every kind word, every seemingly loyal gesture, knowing that a misjudgment could cost you your life. This intense suspicion often led emperors to become paranoid, reclusive, or even to preemptively eliminate those they thought might be a threat, further isolating themselves. Compounding this was the relentless tide of flattery. As emperor, you were surrounded by sycophants eager to gain favor, wealth, or power. They would praise your every action, regardless of its wisdom, affirm your every whim, and constantly tell you what you wanted to hear, making it almost impossible to get honest advice or an accurate assessment of reality. Imagine making a terrible decision, only to have everyone around you tell you it was a stroke of genius, making it impossible to learn from your mistakes. It's enough to make you long for a single person who would tell you the unvarnished truth. Even if it wasn't flattering, the tragic consequence was the extreme scarcity of true friends. Genuine relationships, built on mutual respect and affection, were incredibly difficult to maintain when one party held absolute power over the other's life and fortune. The fear of being seen as too close to the emperor, or of falling out of favor, often warped friendships into transactional relationships. Imagine having known someone your entire life, only for your new imperial title to turn them into a Boeing, scraping shadow of their former self, constantly trying to gain your favor. This profound personal isolation meant that the emperor, despite commanding vast legions and immense wealth, often lived in a gilded cage of loneliness, surrounded by fair-weather friends and hidden enemies, leading to deep psychological distress and a detachment from the very people they ruled. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this personal isolation is the tendency of many emperors to become increasingly reclusive or paranoid during their reigns. withdrawing from public life and relying on a very small, often questionable, inner circle of trusted or seemingly trusted advisors, as seen with Tiberius's retreat to Capri or Domitian's later paranoia. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, desperate for genuine companionship or honest opinions, would reportedly maintain secret correspondence with old, less ambitious friends from before their ascension, using coded messages or trusted couriers, just to get a glimpse of an unfiltered perspective, completely removed from imperial flattery. Imagine your only real therapy session being a coded letter from your college buddy. It certainly highlights the dire need for genuine connection. Historians still argue whether the personal isolation of Roman emperors primarily contributed to tyrannical rule, as emperors became detached from reality and unchecked by honest counsel, or if it was an unavoidable byproduct of supreme power that, in some cases, paradoxically fostered a focus on objective justice and impartiality. Did it lead to madness? Or just extreme impartiality regardless? Your time as a Roman emperor was a lonely climb, fraught with personal isolation, plagued by pervasive trust issues, drowned in relentless flattery, and constantly searching for elusive true friends. So, your time as a Roman emperor was a lonely climb, fraught with personal isolation, plagued by pervasive trust issues, drowned in relentless flattery, and constantly searching for elusive true friends. But even beyond the immediate threats and daily burdens, a more subtle yet powerful pressure would gnaw at your peace of mind. Legacy pressure, historical judgment, public opinion. Forget living for the moment. Every Roman emperor was acutely aware that their every action would be scrutinized by future generations, recorded by historians, and judged by the court of public memory, making the pursuit of enduring glory a relentless and often terrifying obsession. Imagine looking at the grand monuments built by your predecessors, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Forum of Augustus. You wouldn't just see impressive architecture, you'd see the tangible manifestation of legacy pressure. Every emperor was acutely aware that they were a link in a long chain of rulers, and that their ultimate worth would be determined by their impact on Rome and how they were remembered. It's like being a famous artist, but your art is running an entire empire, and critics in 1,000 years will decide if your masterpiece was actually a total mess. This meant a constant struggle with historical judgment. Roman historians, though often biased, meticulously recorded the reigns of emperors, detailing their triumphs, their failures, their virtues, and their vices. You knew that your actions would be immortalized, for better or worse. In the annals of history, imagine commissioning a grand arch to celebrate your victories, knowing that future historians might instead focus on your cruelties or your financial mismanagement, tarnishing your carefully constructed image. This awareness could drive emperors to undertake ambitious building projects, wage costly wars, or even engage in acts of calculated cruelty, all in an attempt to shape their historical narrative, beyond the formal histories. There was the more immediate and unpredictable force of public opinion. While emperors controlled much of the state propaganda, remember the coins and statues. Popular sentiment could shift dramatically and quickly. Whispers, jokes, and widespread discontent could undermine your authority, even if not openly expressed. Imagine hearing a subtle satirical poem about your latest decree being recited in the forum, or seeing a caricature of your face graffitied on a wall, knowing that these seemingly small acts reflected a deeper, widespread dissatisfaction that could eventually explode into open rebellion. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life where your biggest worry is just a bad review on Yelp, not an angry mob. The struggle to control and shape this public opinion, both in your lifetime and for posterity, was a relentless psychological burden. Emperors would spend vast sums on propaganda, carefully cultivate their image, and ruthlessly suppress dissent, all in an attempt to secure a favorable place in history. This profound legacy pressure often led emperors to make decisions not just for the immediate benefit of the empire, but with a constant eye on how those decisions would be perceived centuries later. adding another layer of complex motivation and anxiety to their already immense responsibilities. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this legacy pressure is the practice of damnatio memoriae, where the Senate would formally condemn a deceased emperor, ordering his statues to be pulled down, his name erased from inscriptions, and his memory officially obliterated. A stark and terrifying example of historical judgment in action. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate bid to ensure their posthumous glory, would reportedly commission their own historians or poets to write lavish, often exaggerated accounts of their reign during their lifetime, essentially ghostwriting their own positive historical narratives for future generations. Imagine hiring someone to write your glowing biography before you've even finished your second term. It certainly highlights the obsessive desire to control their historical image. Historians still argue whether the pressure of historical judgment primarily compelled Roman emperors to strive for greatness and act for the long-term good of the empire, hoping for a positive legacy, or if it instead fostered vanity projects, reckless wars, and ultimately led to more ruthless actions to silence critics and control their narrative. Did it inspire greatness? Or just more tyranny? Regardless, your reign as a Roman emperor was a constant struggle against legacy pressure, perpetually concerned with historical judgment, and striving to manage fickle public opinion. So, your reign as a Roman emperor was a constant struggle against legacy pressure, perpetually concerned with historical judgment, and striving to manage fickle public opinion. But even if you skillfully navigated all these external pressures, the relentless weight of the world, the constant fear, and the unending demands of the purple would eventually take their most insidious toll internally: insomnia and stress, sleepless nights, mental anguish. Forget peaceful slumber and tranquil minds. The imperial throne often became a gilded prison of perpetual anxiety, robbing emperors of their rest and gnawing away at their very sanity. Imagine lying in your lavish bed, surrounded by the finest silks and tapestries. Yet sleep remains elusive. This was the profound and often debilitating reality of insomnia and stress. The sheer magnitude of your responsibilities, coupled with the ever-present dangers and the complete lack of true privacy, remember that, created an environment perfectly designed to erode your mental peace and physical rest. It's like being the only person in the entire world who knows how many problems there are, and your brain just won't shut off. The consequence was often endless sleepless nights. Your mind would race, replaying the day's decisions, worrying about barbarian incursions, remember them, plotting against perceived enemies, remember the palace intrigue, or fretting over the next financial crisis, remember the empty coffers. The silence of the night would amplify your fears and anxieties, making genuine rest an impossibility. Imagine tossing and turning for hours, the weight of the entire empire pressing down on you, knowing that a clear mind was crucial for tomorrow's decisions. But exhaustion was consuming you. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life where your biggest worry is just remembering to set your alarm clock. This chronic lack of sleep, combined with the extreme pressures of the office, inevitably led to profound mental anguish. Many emperors, even those initially strong and stable, eventually succumbed to paranoia, erratic behavior, severe depression, or even outright madness. The isolation, remember that too. The constant fear for their lives and the burden of ultimate responsibility could break even the most resilient mind. Imagine feeling the creeping tendrils of paranoia, distrusting even your own reflection, convinced that everyone around you is plotting your downfall, and realizing you have no one, absolutely no one, to confide in. It's like living in a perpetual state of high alert, where your own mind becomes your worst enemy. This internal torment was perhaps the cruelest aspect of the imperial office, ensuring that even emperors who seemingly had everything power, wealth, glory often lived lives of profound suffering, their minds unraveling under the unbearable weight of the purple. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this mental anguish is the documented accounts of certain emperors, like Caligula or Nero, whose reigns are characterized by increasingly erratic, tyrannical, and seemingly irrational behavior, often attributed by ancient historians to the psychological toll of power and paranoia. Leading to severe mental instability, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to induce sleep, would reportedly employ specialized imperial storytellers or lullaby singers who would recite monotonous historical accounts or soothing poems for hours on end, hoping the sheer boredom or rhythmic drone would lull them into unconsciousness. Imagine having a personal historian whose main job is to put you to sleep with tales of ancient battles. It certainly highlights the depths of their desperation for rest. Historians still argue whether the high incidence of insomnia and mental anguish among Roman emperors primarily led to the empire's decline by fostering incompetent or tyrannical rule, or if it was an unavoidable cost of such immense power that, in some cases, paradoxically fueled a desperate ambition to secure a lasting legacy. Did it cause Rome's fall? Or was it just a personal tragedy for its rulers regardless? Your life as a Roman emperor was a relentless internal battle, plagued by debilitating insomnia and stress, enduring countless sleepless nights, and suffering profound mental anguish. Word count 1060. Now, let the heavy purple robes fade from your vision. The echoes of the bustling forum recede, and the chilling whispers of palace intrigue gently dissipate. The weight of the crown lifts from your brow. The gnawing anxiety in your stomach quiets, and the terrifying fear of assassins melts away into a blurring memory. There's no more threat of betrayal, no more concern about barbarian incursions, and no more struggle against overwhelming demands. Just the soft hum of your fan, the gentle warmth of your blanket, and the profound quiet of your room. You can release the imagined burdens of that impossibly heavy Roman emperor's life, the constant public performance, the pervasive fear, and the terrifying realities of a world where power could be a curse. That grand, fascinating, yet undeniably harsh ancient world of emperors belongs to history, not to your peaceful present. Drift now into a deep, untroubled rest. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.